September 3rd, 1982. A 15-year-old girl says goodbye to her boyfriend. She walks toward a bus stop. She never makes it home. The next morning, her body is found behind a cinder block wall. She's been sexually assaulted and stabbed 59 times. Detectives collect evidence. They find blood at the scene, but it's not all hers. Some of it belongs to the killer. They preserve it, catalog it, store it, and they wait. They wait for 43 years. Calendar pages flipping 1982, 1990, 2000, 2010, 2020, 2025 because in 1982, DNA technology doesn't exist. Not the way we know it today. But in 2025, everything changes. 43 years later, when DNA finally catches killers, my name is Dark Veil File. And this is the story of 3 cold cases that were finally solved in 2025, not because of new witnesses or confessions, but because of science. Genetic genealogy, Y-STR DNA testing, ballistic databases, technologies that didn't exist when these crimes were committed. Karen Stitt, 15 years old, murdered in 1982. Estella Mena, 18 years old, murdered in 1979. And 4 teenage girls, Amy Ayers, Sarah Harbison, Jennifer Harbison, and Eliza Thomas, murdered in a yogurt shop in 1991. 1 detective in California, 1 detective in Texas. Both refused to give up. And in 2025, families who'd waited for decades finally got answers. This is about more than solving crimes. It's about a promise that even after 40 years, justice can still prevail. Let's begin. To understand how these cases were solved, you first need to understand the revolution that happened in forensic science. In 1982, when Karen Stitt was murdered, DNA profiling had just been invented by British geneticist Alec Jeffreys. The first criminal conviction using DNA evidence wouldn't happen until 19875 years after Karen's death. The technology was expensive, slow, and required large samples of biological material. Most police departments couldn't afford it. But investigators in Sunnyvale, California, did something crucial. They preserved the evidence anyway. Blood found at the Karen Stitt crime scene was carefully stored, cataloged, kept in temperature-controlled environments. The detectives who worked that case in 1982 knew they might not be able to use the evidence in their lifetimes, but they preserved it for the future. And in 2025, that foresight paid off. Genetic genealogy. The game changer, the breakthrough that solved these cases, is called investigative genetic genealogy. How it works: extract DNA from crime scene, upload profile to genealogy databases. Find distant relatives, 3rd cousins, 4th cousins, build family trees, narrow down to suspects. This is the same technology people used to find out if they're Irish or Italian. The same databases where you upload your DNA to find long-lost cousins. But law enforcement realized they could use these databases to find criminals. The Golden State Killer case in 2018 proved it could work. After 40 years, genetic genealogy identified Joseph D'Angelo, a serial rapist and murderer who'd terrorized California in the 1970s and 80s. Detective Matt Hutchison of the Sunnyvale Department of Public Safety was paying attention, and he had 2 unsolved murders that had haunted his department for decades. September 2nd, 1982. Thursday night. 15-year-old Karen Stitt lives in Palo Alto, California, with her parents. She's a student at Palo Alto High School. Bright, kind, beautiful, that's how her family describes her. That evening, Karen takes a bus from Palo Alto to Sunnyvale to visit her boyfriend, a 17-year-old boy we'll call David. They spend the evening together. They go to 7-Eleven. They play mini golf. They hang out at an elementary school, typical teenage stuff. Around midnight, David walks Karen to the bus stop at El Camino Real and Wolf Road. He watches her walk toward the stop. Then, worried he'll miss his curfew and get grounded, he runs home. That was the last time anyone saw Karen Stitt alive. The next morning, a delivery truck driver discovers Karen's body about 100 yards from the bus stop. She's hidden behind a blood-stained cinder block wall. Her hands and feet are bound with her own clothing. She's been sexually assaulted, and she's been stabbed 59 times. Detective Matt Hutchison, who would later take over the case, described it as the most graphic and violent scene he'd seen in his career. The killer had tried to hide her body, but he'd left something behind. Blood. Blood on the wall behind Karen's body. Blood that wasn't hers. The killer had cut himself during the frenzied attack, and investigators collected that blood. In 1982, there was nothing they could do with it, but they preserved it anyway. For decades, Karen's boyfriend David was considered a suspect. He was the last person to see her alive. He'd walked her to that bus stop. For 40 years, David lived under a cloud of suspicion. Some people in the community believed he was involved, but he wasn't. In 2025, DNA evidence would definitively clear him. The blood at the scene didn't match David. It never had. But in 1982, they had no way to prove it. The case went cold. Leads dried up. Detectives retired. New detectives took over. The case file was passed from one generation of investigators to the next, like a sacred trust. In 2017, Detective Matt Hutchison of the Sunnyvale Department of Public Safety decided to take another look. Hutchison had joined the department in 2014. Cold cases became his side project, extra assignments he worked on during his free time. But the Karen Stitt case became an obsession. I looked at all the evidence without any assumptions. Hutchison would later tell ABC's 2020s. I wanted fresh eyes on everything. In early 2019, Hutchison got a tip. Using genetic genealogy techniques, he determined that Karen's killer was likely one of 4 brothers from Fresno, California. 4 brothers. Same DNA markers. Same family tree. But which one? Hutchison and his team began investigating all 4 brothers. They tracked down addresses, employment histories, criminal records, and they found something interesting about one brother in particular. His name was Gary Ramirez. Born in Fresno, Gary Ramirez had served in the U.S. Air Force in the early 1970s. After leaving the military, he'd moved around frequently: San Francisco, San Diego, Colorado, Hawaii, and in 1982, he was living in the Bay Area. But having a suspect and having evidence are 2 different things. Hutchison needed Ramirez's DNA to compare to the blood found at the crime scene, so he got creative. In 2022, Hutchison learned that one of Gary Ramirez's daughters lived in Southern California. Legally, once trash is placed on the curb for collection, it's no longer private property. Law enforcement can collect and test it without a warrant. Hutchison's team secretly collected trash from the daughter's home. Inside that trash, they found items with her DNA on them. They tested it. The daughter's DNA was a familial match to the blood found at Karen Stitt's murder scene 40 years earlier. They had their man. By 2022, Gary Ramirez was 75 years old and living in Makawao on the island of Maui, Hawaii. On August 2nd, 2022, exactly 40 years and 11 months after Karen Stitt's murder, a team of 14 law enforcement officers descended on Ramirez's home. He was arrested and extradited to California to face charges of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and sexual assault. The man who'd evaded justice for 43 years was finally in custody. On February 24, 2025, Gary Ramirez pleaded no contest to first-degree murder in Karen Stitt's death. Karen's family was there, dozens of them. After 43 years, they finally had their day in court. Robin Morris, Karen's paternal aunt, spoke about her niece. Karen was bright and kind and beautiful, she said through tears. On May 12, 2025, Judge Henley Chu sentenced Gary Ramirez to 25 years to life in prison with the possibility of parole. Ramirez was 78 years old. This was the maximum sentence for a man his age under California law. District Attorney Jeff Rosen issued a statement. Over 40 years ago, Karen Stitt lost her life, but she was not forgotten. Today, thanks to a dedicated detective, a persistent prosecutor, and our crime lab, the person responsible is behind bars. For Detective Hutchison, the victory was bittersweet. These cases will haunt me, he told ABC's 2020s. They get into your soul. They will affect me for the rest of my life. But he also acknowledged he didn't solve the case alone. It was all of us, he said. Not just me. It was the detectives who preserved that evidence 40 years ago. It was everyone who never gave up. Karen Stitt would have been 57 years old in 2025. She never got to graduate high school, never went to college, never got married or had children. But her killer who stole her future finally faced justice. 3 years before Karen Stitt was murdered, another young woman was killed in Sunnyvale. Her name was Estella Mena. August 13, 1979. Estella was just 18 years old, still a high school student, but working part-time as a security guard to help support her family. That night, she was working the overnight shift at an office building in Sunnyvale. Routine security work, walking the halls, checking doors. Around midnight, someone attacked her. Estella was stabbed multiple times. Her body was left in a corner next to a vending machine. Like Karen Stitt's case, blood evidence was collected from the scene. And like Karen's case, the technology didn't exist in 1979 to analyze it properly. So it sat in evidence storage for 44 years. The same detective who solved Karen Stitt's murder also took on Estella Mena's case. Matt Hutchison realized both murders had similar characteristics. Young women's Sunnyvale brutal stabbings, blood evidence preserved in 2022. The same year he broke the Stitt case, Hutchison ordered new DNA testing on blood found on Estella Mena's shoe. The blood was run through CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System, a national database of DNA profiles from convicted offenders. And they got a hit. Samuel Silva. Born in 1961, Silva had a criminal record including sexual assault and violence convictions. There was just one problem. Silva was already dead. He died in 2008 while serving time in a Colorado federal prison on gun possession charges. Samuel Silva would never stand trial for Estella Mena's murder. But after 44 years, her family finally knew who killed her, and she was officially vindicated. Two young women, 3 years apart, both stabbed to death in Sunnyvale. Different killers, but both cases solved by the same detective using the same technology. Detective Hutchison's persistence had brought closure to two families who'd waited more than 4 decades for answers. In January 2025, ABC's 2020 aired an episode titled Badass Detective, profiling Hutchison's work on both cases. The nickname stuck, because that's exactly what he is. But while Detective Hutchison was solving cold cases in California, another detective in Texas was about to crack one of the most infamous unsolved murders in American history. December 6, 1991. Austin, Texas. It's a Friday night. The city is getting ready for the holidays. Christmas lights are going up. Families are shopping. At a yogurt shop in North Austin, 4 teenage girls are working or hanging out. Visual photos of the 4 victims, 17-year-old Eliza Thomas and 17-year-old Jennifer Harbison, are employees working the closing shift. Jennifer's younger sister, 15-year-old Sarah Harbison, and their friend, 13-year-old Amy Ayers, stopped by to meet them after work so they can all head home together. Around p.m., someone enters the yogurt shop. What happens next will haunt Austin for 34 years. Shortly before midnight, a police patrolman sees smoke and flames coming from the yogurt shop. Firefighters respond. They extinguish the fire, and inside, they make a horrifying discovery. 4 bodies. The 4 teenage girls. They've been bound with their own clothing, gagged, shot in the head, sexually assaulted. And then the killer or killers set the shop on fire, attempting to destroy the evidence. The murders shocked Austin, devastated the city. This was a safe place, a college town. These were honor students, athletes, good kids. Parents kept their children home. The community demanded answers. The Austin Police Department assembled a massive task force dedicated solely to solving the case. And for years, they got nowhere. The wrong men. In October 1999, nearly 8 years after the murders, Austin police announced a major break in the case. They'd arrested 4 men: Michael Scott, Robert Springsteen, Maurice Pierce, and Forrest Welburn. 2 of them, Scott and Springsteen, confessed after lengthy interrogations. Charges were dropped against Pierce and Welburn due to lack of evidence. But Scott and Springsteen went to trial. They were convicted of capital murder based solely on their confessions. They went to prison. Case closed, right? Wrong. In 2008, the Travis County District Attorney's Office decided to use a new type of DNA testing called Y-STR testing before retrying the men. Y-STR testing can isolate male DNA from mixed samples like biological evidence from a sexual assault. Visual Test results: they tested vaginal swabs taken from the victims in 1991, and they found male DNA. But it didn't match Scott, Springsteen, Pierce, or Welburn. It didn't match any of the four arrested men. Prosecutor Rosemary Lemberg was stunned. She wanted to retry Scott and Springsteen, but first she needed to figure out who that mystery DNA belonged to. Over 100 men connected to the case: investigators, medical examiners, anyone who might have contaminated the scene were tested. None matched. In 2009, with no matches and constitutional issues with the original confessions, all charges were dropped. After nearly 10 years behind bars, Scott and Springsteen were released. They weren't exonerated, just released. The families of the four murdered girls were crushed. Whoever killed Amy, Sarah, Jennifer, and Eliza was still out there, and the case went cold again. 34 years later, the bullet casing detective Michael Jackson took over the yogurt shop case in 2022. In June 2025, Jackson did something simple but brilliant. He submitted a .380 caliber bullet casing recovered from a drain at the yogurt shop back in 1991 into NIBIN. NIBIN equals National Integrated Ballistic Information Network, like CODIS, but for shell casings. In July 2025, Jackson got a hit. The same gun had been used in an unsolved murder in Kentucky. Similar details. But that wasn't all. Jackson also requested a manual Y-STR DNA search from every lab in the United States that maintains Y-STR profiles. Most labs didn't respond. It's rare data, not commonly searched. But one lab did, the South Carolina State Lab, and they had a match. Robert Eugene Brashers. Brashers was a convicted killer with a horrifying criminal history. 1,970 seconds. Served time for shooting a woman 1989. Released on parole 1990. Sexual assault and murder in Greenville, South Carolina 1991. The yogurt shop murders December 6, 1997. Rape of a 14-year-old in Memphis, Tennessee 1998. Double murder of a woman and her 12-year-old daughter in Missouri 1999. Died by suicide after a standoff with police in Tennessee. Brashers was a serial killer who traveled across the country committing sexual assaults and murders for nearly a decade. And in December 1991, he'd stopped in Austin, Texas. The Y-STR DNA sample taken from Amy Ayers' body in 1991 was a perfect match to Robert Eugene Brasher's profile. An Austin-based testing firm called Signature Science confirmed the match. Dr. Dana Kadavi, director of the Austin Forensic Science Department, summed it up perfectly. The DNA story never changed. The DNA collected in 1991 had been telling them who the killer was for 34 years. They just didn't have the technology or the databases to identify him until 2025. On September 30, 2025, Austin Police Chief Lisa Davis held a press conference. One of the most devastating and haunting cases in our city's history has been solved, she announced. The families of the four girls were there. After 34 years of waiting, wondering, hoping, they finally had answers. Amy Ayers would have been 47 years old. Sarah Harbison would have been 49. Jennifer Harbison would have been 51. Eliza Thomas would have been 51. They never got to grow up, never graduated high school, never went to college, got married, had children of their own. But their families, who never gave up, who fought for justice, who demanded answers, finally got closure. In December 2025, the Travis County District Attorney's Office filed a motion to officially exonerate Michael Scott, Robert Springsteen, Maurice Pierce, and Forrest Welburn, the four men who were wrongfully accused. They'd spent years under suspicion. Two had spent nearly a decade in prison. All four had their lives destroyed by false accusations. Now, finally, they were cleared. Angie Ayers, Amy's sister-in-law, said it best. Amy fought for her life. The DNA under her fingernails proved it. She was a fighter until the very end. So why do these cases matter? Why should we care about murders from 1979, 1982, and 1991? Because to these families, justice isn't bound by time. Karen Stitt's Aunt Robin waited 43 years for answers. Estella Mena's family waited 44 years. The families of Amy, Sarah, Jennifer, and Eliza waited 34 years. And because of detectives who refused to give up, who treated decades-old cases with the same urgency as fresh ones, those families finally got closure. But it's about more than individual cases. These breakthroughs represent a fundamental shift in criminal justice. There are thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of cold cases in America. Murders that were never solved. Killers who were never caught. But those cases have evidence. Blood, hair, skin cells. And as DNA databases grow, as technology improves, as genetic genealogy becomes more sophisticated, more cases will be solved. Every year, more families get answers. In 2024 alone, hundreds of cold cases were solved using genetic genealogy and advanced DNA testing. The technology works, and it's only getting better. These cases also raise important questions about statutes of limitations. Some crimes have time limits. After a certain number of years, you can't be prosecuted. But murder? There's no statute of limitations on murder in most states. And now, with DNA technology, there's no escape even after 40 years. But solving cold cases takes a toll. Detective Matt Hutchison spoke openly about the psychological impact. "These cases will haunt me for the rest of my life," he said. "They get into your soul. Imagine spending years, sometimes decades, immersed in the worst moments of people's lives. The brutality, the violence, the senseless loss. That's what cold case detectives do. But they also give families something priceless: closure. Not everyone gets it. Some cases may never be solved. But for the families of Karen Stitt, Estella Mena, Amy Ayers, Sarah Harbison, Jennifer Harbison, and Eliza Thomas, justice finally came. Even if it took 40 years. When I started researching this documentary, I thought it would be about science, about DNA, about technology. And it is about those things. But it's really about people. Karen, who walked to a bus stop and never came home. Estella, who was working an overnight shift to support her family. Amy, Sarah, Jennifer, and Eliza, for girls who just wanted to hang out after work on a Friday night. And it's about their families who refused to forget, who demanded justice, who waited for decades with a hope that never died. It is about detectives who took on cases that had been cold for longer than they'd been alive, who treated 40-year-old murders with the same urgency as if they'd happened yesterday. And it is about scientists who developed technologies that can reach across time to identify killers who thought they'd gotten away with it. Gary Ramirez lived free for 43 years after killing Karen Stitt. He got to grow old, have a family, live in paradise in Hawaii. Karen never got any of that. But at 78 years old, he finally faced justice. Robert Eugene Brashers died by suicide in 1999, never facing trial for the yogurt shop murders. But in 2025, his name was finally attached to that crime. The families got answers. The wrongfully accused men were cleared. Samuel Silva died in prison in 2008, never knowing he'd been linked to Estella Mena's murder. But her family knows now. The lesson is simple. There is no perfect crime. There is no getting away with it. Science will catch up. Databases will grow. Technology will improve. And one day, maybe 40 years later, maybe longer, justice will find you. To Karen, Estella, Amy, Sarah, Jennifer, and Eliza, you were not forgotten. To their families, your wait is over. To the detectives who never gave up, you are heroes. And to anyone who thinks they've gotten away with murder, the DNA doesn't lie. The evidence doesn't disappear. And somewhere, a detective is working your case right now. Justice delayed is not justice denied. If you have information about any unsolved murder, please contact your local police department. Tips can be submitted anonymously. Dedicated to Karen Stitt 19671982, Estella Mena 19611979, Amy Ayers 19781991, Sarah Harbison 19761991, Jennifer Harbison 19741991, Eliza Thomas 19741991. Special thanks: Detective Matt Hutchison, Sunnyvale DPS, Detective Michael Jackson, Austin PD, Santa Clara County DA's Office, Travis County DA's Office, Austin Police Cold Case Unit, ABC News 2020, CBS 48 Hours, Victim Families Research Sources, ABC News 2020's Badass Detective. Santa Clara County District Attorney Austin Police Department CBS 48 Hours Court Documents and Testimony FBI Genetic Genealogy Resources. This documentary is for educational purposes. All information is from public records, court documents, and news sources. We honor the memories of the victims and respect the grief of their families. 2025 Dark Veil File.